The first time Helena Dwyer understood that usefulness could become a kind of prison, she was 11 years old and standing barefoot in a hotel kitchen before sunrise. Her mother had been sick for 3 days. Her father had vanished 2 winters earlier, leaving behind a cracked shaving mug, a stack of unpaid bills, and a reputation for choosing whiskey over responsibility. The hotel owner had come to their rented room before dawn and told Helena that if breakfast was not served on time, her mother would lose her position. So Helena tied on an apron that dragged against the floor, climbed onto an overturned flour crate, and cooked eggs for 32 railroad men. She burned her wrist on a skillet. She cut her thumb while slicing salt pork. She carried kettles so heavy that her shoulders shook beneath their weight. When the dining room finally quieted, the hotel owner counted the receipts, nodded once, and told Helena she had done acceptable work. No one asked whether she was frightened. No one asked whether her hands hurt. They simply learned that she could manage. For the next 20 years, people kept learning the same lesson. Helena could manage kitchens, sick rooms, angry customers, drunken laborers, late deliveries, spoiled flour, broken stoves, and winters when the wind came through the walls like a blade. She grew tall and broad through years of lifting sacks and chopping wood. Her hands thickened with calluses, small white scars marked her fingers, and a crescent-shaped burn curved around her left forearm where a hotel oven door had once slipped from its hinge. She was never delicate, never decorative, and never invited to pretend she was either. By the spring of 1878, Helena had spent 6 years managing the kitchen of a boarding house in Council Bluffs, Iowa. She rose at 4 each morning, baked bread for 20 men, balanced the food accounts, negotiated with merchants, settled disputes among the boarders, and slept in a narrow room beside the pantry. When the boarding house owner died, his son sold the property to a railroad company without warning the staff. Helena received 2 weeks' wages, 1 iron trunk, and a folded newspaper advertisement that had been passed around the kitchen as a joke. Respectable women sought for marriage opportunities in developing Western communities, transportation arranged, character references required. The women laughed when Helena read it. One of them said, the men out west were desperate enough to marry a fence post if it could cook. Another said Helena might finally find a husband strong enough not to fear her. Helena laughed with them because that was easier than showing how deeply the words had landed. 3 weeks later, she wrote to Cordelia Baines. Cordelia operated Baines Provision House in Morrow Junction, Nebraska, a settlement where 2 rail lines, a freight road, and a telegraph route crossed on the edge of open country. Her business sold flour, lamp oil, tools, medicines, cloth, ammunition, and nearly anything else a traveler might need before heading west. Behind the store, she also managed what she called a matrimonial placement service. Helena disliked the phrase from the moment she heard it. It made marriage sound like the shipment of a stove. Still, she had no family left, no property, and no desire to spend another decade feeding men who barely remembered her name. She wanted a home she could help build. She wanted work that belonged partly to her. Most of all, she wanted the right to choose a life instead of merely surviving whichever one had been handed to her. Cordelia accepted her application after receiving letters from 2 merchants and a Methodist pastor who described Helena as reliable, sober, hard-working, and unusually capable in emergencies. Nothing in the letters called her beautiful, Cordelia noticed. By the time Helena arrived in Morrow Junction, 4 other women were waiting in the upstairs rooms of the provision house. Louisa Fenwick was 22, small-boned, and so nervous that she apologized whenever someone else bumped into her. She had soft brown hair, pale blue eyes, and the careful manners of a woman raised in a home where displeasing others had consequences. Her father had died in a grain elevator accident, and her brothers had decided there was no room for her in their households. Miriam Sloane was older, perhaps 28, though the hard months behind her eyes made her seem older. She was slender and unusually pale, with a quiet way of observing a room before entering it fully. She had worked as a seamstress in St. Louis and spoke very little about why she had left. There was also Clara Bell, a cheerful widow hoping to marry a storekeeper, and Ruth Oakes, a farmer's daughter with strong opinions about cattle and church music. Cordelia assessed them all the way a trader might examine horses. She adjusted Louisa's collar, praised Clara's smile, advised Ruth to speak less forcefully, and told Miriam that a little rouge would make her look less ill. When she reached Helena, Cordelia's expression settled into professional disappointment. "You are larger than your photograph suggested," she said. "The photographer told me not to breathe," Helena replied. Louisa covered a surprised laugh with her hand. Cordelia did not smile. Men who come here often expect a certain softness. Then they should purchase a pillow. That earned a real laugh from Miriam, though she turned it into a cough. Cordelia stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You may find that wit is not your strongest advantage." Helena met her eyes. "I have never had trouble finding my advantages." Cordelia looked down at Helena's hands. "You have kitchen burns. I have kitchen experience. You understand that some men may consider such hands unfeminine. Some men have never gone hungry enough to appreciate the hands that feed them." Cordelia's mouth tightened. "There are few guarantees in my line of work, Miss Dwyer. I present possibilities. I do not create miracles." Helena carried her trunk upstairs without replying. 3 days later, 6 men arrived at Bain's Provision House to meet the women. Cordelia staged the gathering in a private room above the store. Lace curtains softened the sunlight. Tea was poured into chipped porcelain cups. The women wore their best dresses, and the men had been instructed to wash before arriving. The meetings proceeded with the discomfort of a church social conducted under commercial terms. Clara matched quickly with a widowed storekeeper from Willow Creek. Ruth found common ground with a cattleman who admired that she knew the difference between redwater and milk fever. Louisa attracted the attention of a young blacksmith named George Pell, though she seemed too frightened to look directly at him. Miriam spoke with 2 men and declined both. Helena sat near the window while the room emptied around her. She had expected this possibility. Knowing it might happen did not make the humiliation smaller. Cordelia approached with a smile, intended to look sympathetic. "There may be another group next month." Helena glanced toward the door. "You told me transportation west would be covered. It was covered to Morrow Junction. That was not how the arrangement was described." Cordelia's smile cooled. "You are welcome to review the agreement." Before Helena could answer, footsteps sounded on the stairs. A man entered the room, carrying snow on his coat, though it was only early October. He was tall but not imposing, lean in the way of men who worked beyond regular meals. His dark blonde hair needed cutting. A short beard shadowed a face marked by sleeplessness and cold. He wore a heavy wool coat patched at one elbow, and his boots were whitened with dried alkali dust. Cordelia stared at him. "Mr. Lenz, you were expected yesterday. The North Road washed out near Caster's Ford." "You were also expected to send payment before arrival. I brought it." He placed an envelope on the table, but kept his eyes on the women. Only Helena and Miriam remained. Cordelia opened the envelope, counted the bills, and seemed satisfied. "Abram Lenz," she said, recovering her polished tone. "Hollis Relay Station, telegraph operator, postkeeper, and federal supply contractor." Abram removed his hat. His gaze moved first to Miriam, then to Helena. Miriam sat perfectly still. Helena watched him assess them. She had endured that look from employers, merchants, and boarding house owners all her life. Most men saw her size first and began subtracting whatever value they imagined it removed. Abram did not. His attention moved to the burn on her arm, the set of her shoulders, and the thickened skin across her palms. "What work have you done?" he asked. Cordelia answered for her. "Miss Dwyer has extensive domestic experience." Helena looked at Abram. "Boarding house kitchens, hotel kitchens before that, food accounts, purchasing, preserving, basic nursing, repairs when no one else was available. Can you ride? Well enough to stay on. Shoot? No. Operate a telegraph key? No. Afraid of isolation? I do not know yet. Cordelia's brows rose at the answer. Abram seemed to consider it seriously. The station is 42 miles from the nearest town. Winter closes the eastern trail for weeks at a time. We receive supply wagons when weather allows. Travelers sometimes shelter there. The work is constant. What happened to the last woman? Helena asked. Cordelia gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Mr. Lenz is not a widower. I did not ask whether she was his wife. Abram's jaw tightened. There was a housekeeper, Mrs. Vale. She left in August after her husband found work in Denver. Did she leave because of the station? She left because her husband asked her to. That was not my question. For the first time, something like approval appeared in Abram's expression. The isolation was hard on her, he said, and the winters are worse than I described. Cordelia stepped between them. Perhaps Mr. Lenz would prefer to speak privately with Miss Sloane. Miriam looked up sharply. Abram studied her for a moment. What work have you done? Seamstress work, Miriam said. Any experience with medicine? No. Livestock? No. Cooking for travelers? A little. Cordelia smiled. Miss Sloane is accomplished with needlework, music, and household presentation. Abram's eyes returned to Helena. How much flour can you lift? Cordelia looked offended. Helena did not. A 50-pound sack without complaint, a 100-pound sack with complaint. The corner of Abram's mouth moved. Can you keep a fire alive through a night storm? Yes. Can you remain calm if a stranger pounds on the door after midnight? That depends on whether the stranger has good manners. Miriam lowered her face, hiding another smile. Abram turned to Cordelia. I choose Miss Dwyer. Cordelia blinked. You may wish to consider more carefully. I have. The agreement is for courtship leading to marriage, not immediate transfer of household labor. I understand the agreement. Helena stood. She was nearly level with Abram's eyes. I have not chosen you, she said. Silence filled the room. Cordelia looked horrified. Abram nodded once. Then ask what you need to ask. Helena appreciated that he did not pretend surprise. Why do you need a wife? The station requires 2 people. That explains why you need help. He glanced toward the lace-covered window. I have lived there alone for 11 months. I am tired of eating canned beans and talking to a telegraph key. That explains why you need a cook and conversation. His eyes met hers. I want a household that is not temporary. It was not a romantic answer, but it sounded honest. Will I be paid for station work? Cordelia inhaled sharply. A wife is not an employee. A wife who works a federal supply post should understand its finances. Abram looked at Helena for several seconds. The contract pays $900 a year, plus freight fees and emergency lodging charges. After supply costs, taxes, and station expenses, there is usually $300 left. And what becomes of that? It has gone toward repairs. That was before you had a wife. If we marry, the remainder belongs to the household. Whose name is on the station lease? Mine. Whose name will be on anything we build? His face became guarded. That can be discussed. Then we are discussing it now. Cordelia stepped forward. Miss Dwyer, there are limits to what a respectable woman may demand at a first meeting. Helena did not look away from Abram. Respectable women are often told to wait until after marriage before learning what they agreed to. A long silence followed. Abram pulled out a chair. Sit, he said. We should discuss the lease. They spoke for almost 2 hours. Helena learned that Hollis Relay Station belonged to a federal mail and telegraph route connecting settlements across the Fenton Basin. Abram managed the telegraph line, kept replacement wire and insulators, sold provisions to wagon parties, boarded stranded travelers, and maintained 3 horses for emergency dispatches. The station sat on a ridge above the basin, where wind struck from 3 directions and snow could bury the road overnight. Abram had inherited the operating agreement from his older brother Samuel, who had died the previous year. "How?" Helena asked. Abram looked toward Cordelia. "Riding accident," Cordelia said quickly. Abram's expression did not change. "That is what was reported." Helena heard the distinction. She stored it away. By the end of the conversation, they agreed to travel together for a trial period of 10 days before marrying. Helena would see the station and decide whether to remain. Abram would pay for her return to Morrow Junction if she refused. Cordelia objected to nearly every term. Helena insisted they be written down. 2 mornings later, Helena left Bain's provision house in a freight wagon beside a man she barely knew. Louisa came outside to say goodbye. Her match with George Pell had been postponed because the blacksmith wanted time to prepare his home. She pressed a small cloth bundle into Helena's hands. "Biscuits," Louisa said. "They are not very good." "They are better than no biscuits." Louisa glanced toward Abram, who was securing the trunk. "Be careful," she whispered. Helena studied her frightened face. "Of him?" "I don't know." Before Helena could ask more, Cordelia called Louisa back inside. Miriam stood behind an upstairs window. She raised one hand in farewell, but her expression held no warmth. Only warning. The journey to Hollis Relay Station took 2 days. The first day carried them across rolling grassland, faded brown beneath the autumn sky. The second took them into rougher country, where the trail narrowed between sandstone bluffs and shallow ravines. Abram spoke little, unless Helena asked a direct question. She learned that he had been born in Pennsylvania, trained as a telegraph operator during the final year of the Civil War, and followed Samuel west after their parents died. He did not talk about the war, though a scar near his right collarbone suggested that it had not passed him untouched. He learned that Helena disliked weak coffee, slept lightly, and could identify spoiled meat by smell before opening the barrel. Near sunset on the second day, the station appeared on a ridge above the basin. It was not a house so much as a collection of structures resisting the land. The main building stood 2 stories high, built of rough-cut timber with a stone foundation and narrow windows. A telegraph wire approached from the east, crossed the roof on glass insulators, and continued west toward the distant hills. A stable leaned behind the house. A storage shed sat half-buried against the slope. A tall iron pipe rose from the roof, above what Abram called the boiler room. The wind struck the wagon as they climbed the final rise. Helena tightened her scarf. "How often does it blow like this?" she asked. "Only when the air is moving." She looked at him. He kept his face straight for 3 seconds before smiling. It changed him more than Helena expected. Inside, the station smelled of coal smoke, leather, lamp oil, and old paper. The front room held a counter, shelves of provisions, 2 tables for travelers, and the telegraph desk. Behind it stood a kitchen with a cast-iron range, a hand pump, and cupboards in desperate need of cleaning. Upstairs were 3 small bedrooms. Abram showed her the largest. "This would be yours during the trial. Where will you sleep?" "The room across the hall." She set her trunk down. "And after marriage?" "That would be your choice." Again, not romantic. Again, honest. Helena spent the first evening examining the station. The flour barrel was damp at the bottom. 2 tins of peaches had swollen and needed to be discarded. The chimney drew poorly. The cellar door did not close properly. The stable roof leaked near the north wall. One of the horses had a split hoof. She made a list. At supper, she placed it beside Abram's plate. He read it in silence. "You found all this in 3 hours?" "I did not inspect the roof closely." "You intend to?" "Before it snows." He folded the list. Samuel used to make lists. Helena waited. Abram looked toward the darkened front room. He believed every disaster announced itself in small ways first. How did he die? Abram's face closed. You said I could ask what I needed to ask, Helena reminded him. He was found below Miller's Bluff with his neck broken. And the horse? Standing half a mile away with blood on the saddle. His blood? Yes? That does not sound like a riding accident. No? Who investigated? Marshal Vernon Tully. And what did he conclude? That Samuel had been drinking. Was he? Samuel did not drink. Helena set down her fork. Why are you still here? Abram looked at her across the table. Because Samuel died trying to protect something. What? I do not know. She knew he was lying. Not completely, not comfortably, but clearly. The realization settled between them like a third person at the table. Helena did not confront him that night. She began work the next morning. Within 3 days, the kitchen changed. The shelves were scrubbed, supplies counted, flour dried, and spoiled goods buried far from the well. Helena repaired the oven latch, rendered tallow for emergency candles, and made stew thick enough to sustain travelers through cold weather. Abram repaired the stable roof after she pointed out that the western beam would not survive heavy snow. They worked well together. That surprised them both. He did not hover while she cooked. She did not interrupt while he handled messages. When travelers arrived, he managed the horses and freight, while she served food and collected payment. Each evening, they compared the day's receipts. On the 5th day, Abram taught Helena the telegraph alphabet. He tapped slowly on the key. A. Helena repeated it. Then, she repeated that too. By the end of an hour, she could receive 6 letters without error. You learn quickly, he said. I dislike being unable to understand a machine in my own house. He glanced at her. You called it your house. I am testing the phrase. That evening, snow began falling over Fenton Basin. Not a storm, only a quiet early dusting that softened the rocks and turned the trail pale. They stood on the porch together. When does winter become dangerous? Helena asked. When the wind stops before the snow. Why? Because the stillness means the pressure is changing. The storm gathers beyond the western ridge, then arrives all at once. Helena watched the flakes settle on the rail. Is that what happened before Samuel died? Abram's shoulders stiffened. She turned toward him. You are asking me to decide whether to marry you. I cannot do that while you hide the reason I may be in danger. You are not in danger. That was not an answer. He looked over the basin. Some knowledge creates danger. No, the men threatened by that knowledge create danger. He said nothing. Helena went inside. The next morning, she informed him that she would return to Morrow Junction when the trial period ended. Abram stared at her across the breakfast table. Because of Samuel. Because you do not trust me. I brought you here. That is not trust. A man can bring a horse into a barn without telling it the barn is burning. His jaw tightened. You compare yourself to a horse. I compare your reasoning to poor animal care. I am trying to protect you. You are trying to control what I know. He rose from the table and walked to the window. For a moment, Helena saw not anger in him, but fear. It did not change her decision. I leave in 5 days, she said. The first message from Louisa arrived that afternoon. It came through the telegraph line just before 4. Abram copied the signals while Helena sorted jars behind the counter. His hand slowed halfway through. What is it? She asked. Nothing. She crossed the room and took the paper from beside him. The message contained only 7 words. The man in the grey hat followed you. Helena read it twice. Who sent this? Abram reached for the paper. She held it away. The signature says L.F. That is Louisa Fenwick. I can see that. Who is the man in the grey hat? I do not know. You are lying again. Abram stood. Lock the front door. Helena did not move. Tell me. Lock it first. Something in his voice persuaded her. She slid the bolt into place while Abram checked the rear entrance and closed the shutters. Then he went upstairs. He returned carrying a narrow metal box. Helena followed him to the kitchen, where he placed the box on the table and unlocked it with a key from beneath his shirt. Inside were folded survey maps, financial ledgers, letters, and a packet of telegraph messages tied with black string. Abram rested both hands on the table. Samuel found evidence that Vernon Tully had been stealing land from settlers. Helena looked at the papers. How? Tully worked with a survey agent and a bank in North Platte. They altered boundary records, claimed homesteaders had settled outside approved parcels, and seized the land for unpaid fees. Then the bank sold it to companies controlled by Tully's partners. And Samuel discovered this? He carried official survey corrections through the station. He noticed that the coordinates in the public filings did not match the federal maps. He began copying records. Helena opened one of the ledgers. Names appeared beside acreage figures and payment dates. Some were marked with a small black cross. What do these marks mean? Settlers who died before they could challenge the seizures. How many? 6 that Samuel confirmed. Helena looked up. Abram's face was pale. He believed at least 3 were murdered, he continued. A barn fire, a hunting accident, and a wagon robbery where nothing was taken. And Samuel. I found a message he sent the night before he died. He said Tully knew about the records. Helena's anger rose slowly, heavier than panic. You knew these documents were here when you brought me. Yes. You knew the man who killed your brother might come looking for them. I believed Tully thought Samuel had hidden them elsewhere. You believed. I had kept them safe for nearly a year. Because you were alone. Then you went to Morrow Junction and chose a woman you thought could survive an attack. Abram did not answer. That answer was enough. Helena stepped away from the table. Every old humiliation returned at once. The hotel owner praising her endurance while ignoring her burns. The boarding house men calling her dependable whenever they wanted more work. Cordelia measuring her value by the labor her body could provide. You did not choose me because you wanted a wife, she said. I chose you because I respected what you could do. You chose me because you needed another guard for your brother's papers. That was not the only reason. But it was a reason you hid. Yes. She looked at the maps, then at him. You placed me on this ridge without telling me that a murderer might come through the door. I intended to send the evidence east before winter. When? As soon as I confirmed the right federal office. You have had 11 months. I did not know whom to trust. So you trusted no one, then brought me here and expected my strength to compensate for your fear. The words struck him. She saw it. Good, she thought. They should. I was wrong, he said. That does not remove the danger. No. You will take me back tomorrow. Abram glanced toward the window, where snow had begun blowing sideways. The road may still be open at dawn. Then we leave at dawn. The wind stopped shortly after midnight. Helena woke in the sudden silence. She remembered Abram's warning and went to the window. Over the western ridge, the sky had disappeared behind a wall of white. The storm arrived before sunrise. Wind slammed against the station, hard enough to shake the glass. Snow swallowed the trail and erased the stable from sight. By breakfast, the drifts reached halfway up the front door. There would be no journey to Morrow Junction. For 2 days, Helena and Abram spoke only when necessary. They fed the horses, cleared the boiler vent, checked the telegraph line, and conserved firewood. The storm trapped them together, while anger moved through the rooms like smoke. On the 3rd evening, the line began clicking. Abram sat at the key and copied the message. It came from Miriam. Cordelia gave Tully the names of men and women sent west. She sold routes and destinations. I saw his payment book. He knows Helena is with you. Helena read the message over Abram's shoulder. Why would Cordelia do that? Money, Abram said. Or fear. Does the reason matter? It matters if we are deciding whether she might warn us. The key began clicking again. This message was shorter. Grey Hat is Deputy Peter Knoll. He left Morrow with 2 men, traveling west. Abram stood. We need to send the evidence now. To whom? Federal Examiner Malcolm Eddowes. Samuel mentioned him in one letter. He investigates land fraud for the Department of the Interior. Where is he? Fort Kearney, last I heard. Helena looked toward the windows. Can the line reach him? If the Eastern Relay is still operating. They spent the next hour preparing a coded summary. Abram transmitted until his hand cramped. The storm interfered with the signal, breaking words apart. Twice the Eastern station asked him to repeat the coordinates. Once the line went dead for 10 minutes. At last, a reply came. Message received. Hold original records. Examiner Eddowes departs when weather permits. Helena exhaled. Abram did not. Tully may intercept the reply at another station, he said. Then we prepare. He looked at her carefully. You still want to leave? I do. And until you can. I intend to remain alive. The next morning, Abram placed a revolver on the kitchen table. Helena looked at it. I said I had never shot, she reminded him. That is why we begin now. They practiced in the storage shed, where the walls blocked the worst of the wind. Abram showed her how to hold the weapon without locking her elbows, how to align the sights, and how to breathe before pulling the trigger. Her first shot missed the grain sack by 2 feet. Her second struck the bottom corner. By the 10th, she could hit the center from 15 paces. You are pulling left, Abram said. I am accounting for an imaginary man who refuses to stand still. He almost smiled. They trained every day. Abram also taught her the station's defenses, though he had never called them that before. The cellar had 2 entrances, one beneath the kitchen and another concealed behind stacked coal near the rear slope. Steam from the boiler could be diverted through a maintenance pipe, filling the back corridor with scalding vapor if a valve was opened. Signal lamps on the roof could warn travelers or confuse men approaching through snow. Helena studied everything. She made improvements. She placed bells on fishing line across the rear yard. She moved the evidence from the metal box into sealed jars hidden beneath a false row of preserved beans. She packed copies of the most important records into the lining of her winter coat. Abram watched her sew the final seam. You have done this before, he said. I have hidden money from drunken men before. Paper is easier. On the 6th day after Miriam's warning, a rider appeared on the Eastern Trail. Helena watched through a field glass. It was Cordelia Baines. She arrived near dark, half frozen, and barely able to remain in the saddle. Abram carried her inside, while Helena rubbed warmth back into her hands and wrapped her in blankets. Cordelia's polished appearance had vanished. Her hair hung loose beneath her bonnet. Ice clung to her skirt. A bruise darkened one cheek. Tully knows the examiner is coming, she whispered. Abram knelt near the stove. How? He has a man at the Eastern Relay. He saw your message. When will they attack? Before the road opens fully. Noll is already nearby. Edwin March and Colin Avery are with him. Helena handed Cordelia a cup of broth. Cordelia's hands shook around it. You sold him our destination, Helena said. Cordelia closed her eyes. Yes. Why? He demanded records after Samuel died. At first, I gave him only the names of men. Then he learned I arranged women's placements too. You accepted money. Yes. How much was my destination worth? Cordelia looked at her with tears in her eyes. $5. Helena absorbed that quietly. $5. Years of labor had made her valuable to Abram. Cordelia had sold her danger for less than the cost of a winter coat. Why warn us now? Abram asked. Tully killed George Pell, Louisa's young blacksmith. Helena felt the room tilt slightly. Cordelia continued in a broken voice. George confronted Noll after Louisa told him about the grey hat. Noll beat him behind the forge. They said he fell, but Louisa saw blood on Noll's cuffs. She came to me for help. Where is Louisa? Helena asked. Hidden with the Methodist family south of town. Miriam took her there. Abram stood. You rode through a storm to tell us this, Cordelia looked toward Helena. I spent years telling myself I only sold harmless information. I said the men were responsible for what they did with it. Then George died, and Louisa asked me whether $5 had been worth his life. No one spoke. Cordelia began to cry without sound. Helena did not comfort her. Some guilt deserved to remain uncomfortable. "They will come tomorrow night," Cordelia said. "Tully believes the examiner cannot reach the basin for 3 more days. He plans to burn the station and blame the boiler." "How many men?" Abram asked. "Tully, Knoll, March, and Avery. Perhaps more." "Will they approach from the east?" Knoll said the rear slope. "They know the front door is reinforced." Helena and Abram exchanged a look. For the first time since he revealed the truth, there was no hidden knowledge between them. Only the problem. "We need witnesses," Helena said. "The nearest ranch is 12 miles away," Abram replied. "The telegraph? They will cut the line before attacking. Then we send a message before they arrive." "To whom?" "Everyone the line can reach." By noon the next day, the storm weakened. Abram transmitted warnings to 3 relay stations: Fort Kearney, the Fenton Basin Stage Office, and Examiner Eddowes. He included the names of the deputies and instructions to send armed assistance. Helena prepared the building. She filled buckets with water and placed them near each room. She moved flour away from the stove, soaked blankets for fire control, and opened a narrow path through the cellar. She loaded 2 revolvers and Abram's hunting rifle. Cordelia asked for a weapon. Helena gave her a kitchen knife. "You have not earned my trust with a firearm," she said. Cordelia accepted the judgment. Near sundown, Abram climbed to the roof to adjust the signal lamps. A rifle shot cracked across the basin. He fell. Helena reached him before he rolled from the porch roof. Blood spread through his coat near his ribs. Another shot struck the chimney. "Inside!" Helena shouted. Cordelia helped drag him through the upper window. Abram's face had gone gray. "The bullet passed through," Helena said after cutting away his shirt. "That is better than remaining inside." "It does not feel better. You may complain after you stop bleeding." She packed the wound with clean cloth and bound it tightly. Below them, glass shattered. A man shouted from the rear yard, "Lenz! Marshal Tully has a warrant for stolen federal documents." Abram tried to rise. Helena pushed him down. "You cannot stand." "I can shoot. You can barely breathe." The telegraph line clicked once, then went silent. Cut. Helena looked through the side window. 3 men moved between the stable and storage shed. One carried a shotgun, another dragged a coil of rope. Tully was not visible. Deputy Knoll shouted again, "Send out the woman and the records. We may let you live." Helena opened the window 2 inches. "You murdered George Pell," she called. Silence followed. Then Knoll laughed. "The blacksmith tripped." "Did he trip onto both sides of your fists?" A shot struck the window frame. Helena moved back calmly. "He is angry," Cordelia whispered. That was the purpose. Helena went downstairs. She lit the rear signal lamp, then placed it behind a moving shutter that cast shadows across the snow. From outside, it looked like people running between rooms. 2 shots followed the shadows. She counted. 1 rifle near the stable, 1 shotgun behind the shed. A 3rd shot came from the ridge. Tully. Helena crawled to the telegraph desk. Though the main line was cut, Samuel had installed a short emergency wire leading to an old survey cabin 2 miles west. Abram had mentioned it only once. She connected the spare key. Any station receiving. Hollis under attack. Lenz wounded. 4 armed men. Send help. She repeated it 3 times. No answer came. The front door shook beneath a heavy impact. Again. They were using a timber ram. Cordelia stood at the kitchen entrance, gripping the knife. "What should I do?" "Take Abram to the cellar." "Abram to the cellar." "He will refuse." Then remind him I am larger than he is, and in no mood to negotiate. The front door cracked. Helena waited beside the wall with the rifle. When the wood split enough for a man to reach through and pull the bolt, she fired into the floor beside his hand. The man screamed and withdrew. "Next shot will be higher," she called. A voice answered from outside. "Miss Dwyer." Marshal Vernon Tully spoke with the smooth patience of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You have been misled by a grieving criminal," he continued. "Abram Lenz stole government files and murdered his brother during a dispute over money." Helena rested the rifle against her shoulder. "You expect me to believe Samuel was murdered by a man who kept every piece of evidence proving someone else did it. You have not seen proof. Only papers Abram claims are proof. I have read them. Can you verify Federal Survey coordinates? No. Can you authenticate bank seals? No. Then you are risking your life for documents you cannot understand." Helena smiled despite the danger. Men like Tully always made the same mistake. They believed ignorance in one subject meant helplessness in all others. "I understand dates," she said. "I understand payments. I understand 6 dead settlers and 1 dead telegraph operator. I also understand that honest marshals do not arrive at night with rifles and attempt to break down doors." Tully's voice lost some of its patience. "Give me the records." "No?" The next strike broke the front door inward. Deputy March rushed through. Helena fired above his head, forcing him down. Cordelia swung a coal shovel from the kitchen doorway and struck his wrist. His revolver slid across the floor. March lunged toward Cordelia. Helena drove the rifle stock into his shoulder. He stumbled, and Cordelia struck him again, this time behind the knee. The deputy collapsed. Helena kicked his weapon away. Noel fired through the doorway. The bullet struck a lamp. Oil spread across the floor and ignited. Helena dragged March behind the counter, while Cordelia smothered the flames with a wet blanket. Smoke filled the front room. A shotgun blast tore through the side shutters. "Cellar," Helena ordered. Cordelia pulled the wounded deputy toward the kitchen stairs. Helena followed, firing once through the doorway to discourage pursuit. In the cellar, Abram was conscious but weak. He saw March and tried to reach for a weapon. "He is ours," Helena said. "Save your strength." Boots crossed the floor above them. Noel and Avery had entered the station. Helena listened. One moved toward the kitchen. The other searched the front room. Tully remained outside. She looked at the boiler pipes running along the cellar ceiling. "Abram, which valve sends steam to the rear corridor?" "The red wheel." "How long before pressure builds?" 2 minutes. Helena turned the wheel. The pipes trembled. Above them, a cabinet crashed. "They are searching for the box," Abram whispered. "They will not find it." "Where are the records?" "In the beans." Even wounded, he looked confused. Helena almost laughed. Avery opened the cellar door. Helena extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. "Come out," Avery called. "Tully says no one else needs to die." Helena picked up a small iron wrench and threw it toward the coal pile. It struck the wall. Avery fired toward the sound. The muzzle flash revealed his position. Abram shot from the floor. The bullet struck Avery's thigh. He fell down the first 3 steps, dropping his pistol. Helena rushed forward, seized his coat, and pulled him the rest of the way down. Cordelia bound his hands with rope. Above them, Noel shouted Avery's name. Helena closed the cellar door and slid the iron bar into place. The boiler gauge climbed. "Now?" she asked Abram. "Not yet." A bullet pierced the cellar door. Cordelia crouched beside the coal bin. March groaned where he lay tied near the wall. The gauge climbed higher. "Now," Abram said. Helena opened the release valve. Steam exploded through the maintenance pipe into the rear corridor. Noel screamed. He stumbled into the kitchen, blinded and coughing. Helena climbed the second cellar exit behind the coal stack. emerged outside, and circled toward the rear door. Through the blowing snow, she saw Noel fall from the kitchen entrance. She struck him across the forearm with a wooden shovel before he could raise his weapon. The revolver dropped. He swung at her with his other hand. Helena stepped inside the blow, drove her shoulder into his chest, and sent him backward into the snow. He tried to rise. She planted one boot on his wrist. "You were worth $5, he gasped. She looked down at him. "What?" "That is what Cordelia charged for your route. $5. Helena tightened her grip on the shovel. For one dangerous second, anger urged her to strike again. Instead, she kicked the revolver away and bound his hands. "You killed a man for asking questions," she said. "You will answer yours in court." A rifle clicked behind her. Tully stood near the stable. Snow clung to the brim of his gray hat. His rifle was aimed at her chest. "Move away from him," he said. Helena released the shovel. Tully approached carefully. "You have made this needlessly difficult. You murdered Samuel Lenz. Samuel was a fool." The admission came easily, almost proudly. "He could have burned the maps," Tully continued. "He could have accepted payment. Instead, he threatened to expose men with investments larger than this entire basin. And the settlers? They occupied valuable land and lacked the means to defend it. So you killed them." "I corrected obstacles." Helena kept her hands visible. Behind Tully, the roof signal lamp continued flashing through the snow. Not randomly. Before the attack, she had set the shutter to repeat 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. A distress signal understood by railroad and telegraph men. She needed time. "What happens after you kill us?" she asked. "The boiler explodes. Abram dies in the fire. You die beside him. My deputies discover Samuel's stolen papers in the ruins. And Cordelia," Tully smiled. "Cordelia has already demonstrated how easily fear controls her." Helena looked toward the station. "You are wrong about her. I am rarely wrong about people. That is why 3 of your deputies are tied in my cellar." His smile vanished. From inside the station, a gunshot sounded. Tully turned his head. Helena moved. She threw herself sideways as he fired. The bullet tore through her coat without striking flesh. She hit the snow hard, rolled behind a water trough, and grabbed Noel's discarded revolver. Tully fired again. Wood splintered above her shoulder. She returned one shot, forcing him behind the stable corner. The wind strengthened, driving snow between them. Helena crawled toward the station porch. Tully circled wide. He was trying to reach the front entrance. Abram lay inside, wounded and nearly helpless. Helena stood and ran. Tully emerged from the snow 10 yards away. Both raised their weapons. "Drop it!" he shouted. Helena held steady. "You cannot shoot me before I shoot you." "Perhaps. You are a cook pretending to be something else." "No," Helena said. "I am a woman who learned long ago that a kitchen contains knives, fire, boiling water, heavy iron, and every reason not to underestimate the person in charge of it." Tully's finger tightened. A shot cracked from the roof. His rifle spun from his hands. Abram lay against the upper window frame, one arm braced around the telegraph support. Smoke rose from his revolver. Tully reached for a pistol at his belt. Helena fired into the snow beside his boot. "Do not." He froze. A distant sound rolled across the basin. Hooves. Many of them. Lanterns appeared along the western trail. Tully looked toward the ridge and understood. The emergency wire had worked. Federal Examiner Malcolm Eddowes arrived with 8 soldiers from a survey escort, 2 riders from the western relay cabin, and a local rancher who had seen Helena's signal flashing through the storm. By dawn, Tully and his deputies were in restraints. Examiner Eddowes spent the next 2 days reviewing Samuel's records. He authenticated the survey maps, payment ledgers, telegraph copies, and bank seals. Cordelia gave a full statement about the information she had sold. Deputy March agreed to testify in exchange for consideration, and Deputy Avery confirmed that Tully had ordered the attack. Peter Knoll refused to speak. He did not need to. The evidence spoke clearly enough. Before leaving for Fort Kearney, Eddowes stood with Helena on the station porch. "You understand that your testimony will be challenged," he said. "Tully's attorneys will claim you acted from loyalty to your husband." "He is not yet my husband." Eddowes looked surprised. Abram, pale but recovering, sat inside near the stove. Helena continued, "And loyalty does not alter dates, signatures, or survey lines." "No," Eddowes said, "it does not. What will happen to the settlers' land? If the department accepts my findings, fraudulent seizures will be reversed. Surviving families may reclaim their parcels. And Samuel? His death will be formally investigated as murder." Helena looked across the white basin. "That matters." "Yes," Eddowes said, "it does." Spring arrived late that year. Snow remained in the northern shadows through April, but grass returned to the lower basin, and wagon traffic slowly resumed. Tully was indicted on charges of conspiracy, fraud, extortion, murder, and attempted murder. Knoll, March, and Avery were tried with him. Cordelia lost her placement business, though her testimony spared her from prison. She sold Bain's Provision House and used part of the money to help Louisa open a small dressmaking shop in Morrow Junction. Miriam became the shop's bookkeeper. Louisa never married George Pell, but she kept his tools wrapped in oilcloth beneath her bed. In time, grief stopped governing every hour of her day. At Hollis Relay Station, Helena remained. Not because she had promised. Not because winter trapped her. She remained because after the danger passed, Abram changed. He did not ask her to forgive him quickly. He did not defend his secrecy by repeating that he had meant to protect her. He listened when she described what his decision had taken from her: the right to understand her own risk, the right to consent, the right to decide whether his cause was worth sharing. He apologized without qualification. Then he began proving that the apology meant something. He added Helena's name to the station accounts. He petitioned the Federal Route Office to list them as joint operators. He divided the annual contract income equally and placed her share in an account she controlled. When repairs were planned, he asked her judgment. When travelers praised the station, he corrected anyone who credited him alone. At night, they sat near the telegraph desk after the final messages had passed. Helena read aloud from newspapers delivered by stagecoach. Abram played quiet tunes on a battered harmonica. Sometimes they talked about Samuel. Sometimes they talked about nothing important at all. Affection entered their lives without announcement. It appeared in the way Abram warmed Helena's gloves near the stove before dawn. It appeared in the way she placed an extra biscuit beside his plate when he worked through supper. It appeared when he woke from dreams of the war and found her sitting nearby without demanding that he explain. It appeared when she burned her hand on a kettle and he carried a basin of cold water to her before she could ask. By early June, they had not married. People assumed they had. Travelers called Helena Mrs. Lenz, and she corrected them every time. One warm evening, Abram asked her to walk with him to the ridge above the station. The basin spread below them, green after months of white. Telegraph poles crossed the land in a straight, dark line. Far to the west, the sunset burned orange behind the hills. Abram carried a folded paper. Helena recognized it immediately. Their original agreement from Bain's Provision House. The document described transportation costs, household expectations, and the 10-day trial period that had ended in gunfire and snow. Abram handed it to her. "What is this for?" she asked. "It was the beginning of a bargain you did not fully understand." "I understand it now." "That is not enough." He looked out over the basin before continuing. "I chose you because I believed you were strong enough to survive what I feared was coming. I told myself that meant I respected you. But respect without honesty is only another form of use." Helena held the paper between both hands. "I did respect you. he said. I also used you. Both things are true. The evening wind moved through the grass. I cannot undo that, Abram continued, but I can make certain no paper, debt, danger, or expectation binds you here. He pointed toward the agreement. Destroy it. Helena studied him. And then? Then you decide what comes next. What do you want? His expression softened. I want you to stay. As your station partner. Yes. As your cook. Only when you refuse to let me near the stove. She almost smiled. As your guard. No. As your wife. Abram took a breath. Yes, but not because winter is coming, or because the station needs 2 people, or because I am afraid of being alone. He stepped closer. I want you beside me, because every honest thing in my life has become clearer since you arrived. I want to hear your boots in the kitchen before dawn. I want to argue with you about freight prices and roof repairs. I want to grow old enough that you finally admit my coffee has improved. It has not. I expected that answer. Helena looked down at the contract. For years, she had been valued for what she could carry, repair, endure, or protect. Abram had first chosen her for the same reasons, though he had wrapped the choice in better language. But he was no longer asking what she could do for him. He was asking what she would choose for herself. Helena tore the contract in half. Then she tore it again. The pieces lifted in the wind and scattered across the ridge. Abram watched them disappear into the grass. Helena turned to him. I will not enter another marriage arranged by fear. I know. I will not be given a household allowance as though I were a hired girl. You will control your own money. I will have equal authority at the station. Yes. If danger comes, you will tell me before it reaches the front door. Yes. If you ever hide murder evidence in my pantry again, I will bury you beneath it. That seems fair. She stepped closer until only a few inches separated them. And when we disagree, we speak honestly. Even when honesty is unpleasant, especially then. Helena searched his face for any sign that he was offering promises merely to secure her answer. She found fear there. Hope, too. But no deception. When? She asked. Abram blinked. When what? When are we getting married? The relief that crossed his face was so open that she laughed. He laughed too, then reached for her with a hesitation that made the gesture more meaningful than confidence would have. Helena placed her hands around his. They married 2 weeks later on the station porch. Louisa, Miriam, and Cordelia traveled from Morrow Junction. Examiner Eddowes served as a witness while a circuit judge performed the ceremony. Several settlers whose land had been restored attended with their families. There were no lace curtains, no commercial agreements, and no woman standing in a room while strangers decided whether she possessed enough softness to deserve a home. Helena wore a deep blue dress Miriam had sewn for her. It fit her broad shoulders without attempting to disguise them. Her hands remained scarred. Her left wrist still bore the old oven burn from childhood. Abram held those hands as though they were precious. When the judge asked whether Helena entered the marriage freely, she answered in a voice that carried across the ridge. I do. This time, the words belonged entirely to her. Years later, travelers told stories about the woman who defended Hollis Relay Station during the blizzard. Some exaggerated the number of attackers. Others claimed Helena had fired through a keyhole, fought 2 men with a frying pan, or sent a telegraph message while the building burned around her. Helena corrected them when she had the patience. The truth, she said, was less dramatic and more important. She had not survived because she was fearless. She had survived because she prepared, learned what she did not know, trusted the right people, and refused to surrender her judgment to men who mistook authority for virtue. Hollis Relay Station grew into a busy waypost. Helena managed its accounts, expanded its food stores, and organized an emergency shelter for travelers caught in winter storms. Abram maintained the telegraph line and trained operators for new stations across the basin. Their marriage was not without conflict. They argued over money, work, risk, and the proper strength of coffee. They sometimes spoke sharply, and occasionally slept angry. But neither treated disagreement as disobedience. Neither confused love with ownership. When one made a decision that affected them both, the other was told before the consequences arrived. That was the promise beneath all their other promises. Helena had once believed strength meant carrying whatever burden was placed in front of her. In time, she learned that real strength also meant refusing burdens imposed without consent. It meant demanding truth before loyalty, choice before sacrifice, and equality before devotion. Abram had once believed protection meant keeping danger secret. He learned that secrecy did not spare the people he loved. It only denied them the dignity of choosing how to stand beside him. Their life together began not when he selected her in a provision house, nor when she saved him during the storm, but on the ridge where he returned her freedom, and she chose him without fear. And that was the lesson their story left behind. A person's strength is not permission to use them, love is not proven by control, and the strongest partnerships are built when two people are free to walk away yet choose, with open eyes and equal voices, to remain.